Hi everyone, and welcome to Two Composers, One Channel. Today we're talking about classical music which is inspired by popular music, and we've got a fabulous guest joining us for the discussion.
Holly Harrison is one of Australia's leading young composers. Her music is driven by what she describes as the visceral energy of rock, and she'll be joining us soon to talk about all of this.
Many classical composers draw inspiration from popular music. When the American composer Steve Reich heard a performance of his Electric Counterpoint by Radiohead guitarist Johnny Greenwood, he was inspired to compose Radio Rewrite, a 5-movement piece inspired by 2 Radiohead songs.
And there are some prominent composers who actually started their careers in popular music. Johnny Greenwood himself is a well-known example, as is Bryce Dessner, guitarist for The National, and Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails.
There are some prominent composers who draw on popular music in Australia too. My former teacher, Matthew Heinsohn, is well known for pieces inspired by electronica, and one of his early breakthroughs was the orchestral piece Homage to Metallica. So, Tom, let me ask you first, does popular music influence your work? And if so, how?
Simply put, yes. Popular music has a really pronounced influence on my work in a few different areas. So firstly is just thinking about raw sound and texture. So I take a lot of influence from post-rock and ambient bands like Sigur Rós and Godspeed You Black Emperor. I'm quite attracted to things that stay in the same harmony and notes, but the actual nature of the sound is changing and oscillating and moving, sort of like when you're making soup and you have to bring it to the boil, even though it stays in the same pot, it's sort of moving around. And there's also a rhythmic and groove element. Like rhythm is perhaps the most important element to my writing, I guess. Mm-hmm. And back in my late teens, I was in a prog rock band. Soon enough, though, my rhythmic tastes expanded. So those are artists like Snarky Puppy and D'Angelo, Jay Dilla, Tigran Hamasyan, but probably most of all the electronic music producer Phonon. So I'm currently challenging myself to write a piece called Wonk, which translates these influences into something that's practical for an orchestra to play. What about yourself?
Look, yes, I consider myself a bit of a musical magpie. So I'm always gathering little shiny snippets from different bits of music that I'm listening to, and they find their way into my music. What I've never done is tried to fully emulate a popular style in my work. I've never tried to imbue a piece I'm writing with the essence of jazz or electronica. In your prog rock days, I was in a jazz band, and I was briefly in a rap band, Engage. And so, I've written quite a lot of jazz pieces and rap beats, and I still like making rap beats just for fun. For whatever reason, it's not been something that I've combined with my classical composing. Given that you do this in a bit more of a focused sort of way, I'd love to know, in your mind, what does popular music bring to your work that you can't find elsewhere, and what are the benefits? Do you feel that it increases the audience, expands the audience for your work?
I think it piques a little bit more interest, but I don't know if it's helping. I don't know if I've no control group. It's bringing a different angle to my work. In what areas of musical thought, whether it be rhythm or the nature of sound itself or harmony, do the branches of classical and jazz meet? Do Baroque music and funk meet? Do reggae and sonata form meet? And where are they incompatible or impractical or just stupid sounding? I think it, as well as the sounds itself, it gives me just unique jumping off points and different angles to view my music from.
That's very interesting. There's great music in all genres. There's great classical music, there's rubbish classical music, and there's all sorts of great popular music as well. So if you're a composer and you're only listening to classical music, that's not necessarily an indicator to me that you're going to be a great composer, because, you know, I think listening to all sorts of stuff indicates that you're being open-minded, which can only be a good thing. It's possible to write really great pieces that draw on popular music, and it's also possible to write some pretty naff pieces as well. You know, a string quartet that is supposed to capture the essence of electronica that hasn't been done very well and maybe isn't performed quite right as well, that can be really, really naff. It can be neither as...
It can certainly be done without like due diligence paid to both styles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you do hear a fair bit of that. So it can be great and it can be not so great, but that is true of any technique as well. So
I mean, it's just a tool, isn't it? It's like you can use a hammer to build or ruin a house.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's talk to someone who uses the hammer to build houses and build them really well. Holly Harrison, shall we bring her in?
Let's do it. Holly Harrison is a composer based in Western Sydney. Her music has been played by many of Australia's leading orchestras and chamber ensembles, as well as internationally by groups such as Eighth Blackbird and Alarm Will Sound.
We're really excited to have her on the channel as we reach our 6th video since launching the channel. It's been a lot of fun getting the channel to this point and a lot of work as well. So if you're enjoying the channel, please do subscribe, like, comment. This helps the channel reach more people and we really appreciate it. Okay, here's Holly. Hi, Holly.
Hey, Angus. Hey, Tom.
Welcome to the channel. We've been looking forward to having you on for ages, and we've introduced you a little bit, but I wonder, for people that aren't familiar with you and familiar with your work, would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do and your work?
I sort of like to think of my music as having maybe sort of 3 hallmarks, or the way that I think about my music as being driven by stylistic juxtapositions and sort of the energy and viscerality of rock music, or sort of popular music in general. And also, I really love humor, so I try and imbue like lots of sort of whimsical moments, or maybe even laugh out loud moments for those that are inclined in the audience. I'm really interested in kind of nonsense in music and play in music, and I write for a bunch of different ensembles, so chamber music groups, more recently a lot of orchestral work, wind band, yeah, you name it. And I also, I've got a bit of a background playing in rock bands.
Delving down into more like specifics, like what sort of music influences how you write? Because I assume not everything you play or listen to influences how you write.
So I played trumpet, or my first instrument was trumpet. And then when I was about 13, I started playing drums, and that's always been really important aspect of how I compose in any way, because I do a lot of writing at the drum kit. So before I come up with pitch or sort of textures, or even know maybe like what kind of layering is going to happen, I'm very sort of, I don't know, I find composition very physical and like very intuitive in that sense. So I like to sit at the drums and think, oh, okay, like I've got 4 limbs, and one of these controls a bass drum, and my 2 hands can control whatever you want. Like, basically, that's the great thing about drums and percussion, isn't it? It can control anything. And I love sort of finding that interaction between different hands and different feet, and then thinking, oh, okay, like maybe my right hand can control like the piccolo. I know that not everybody's like this, but I feel like my own composing process is very visceral and intuitive in that sense. And so that physicality, because I feel like I've grown up playing so much rock music and metal and things like that, I'm really attracted to different time signatures and creating rudiments that interact with those time signatures that can then be overlaid onto drum kit and then overlaid onto like a string quartet, you know? Mm-hmm. So a few years ago, I wrote this string quartet, Balderdash, and I started all of that at the drums and on an electronic drum kit, and I replaced each of the pads with different pizzicato sounds. So it could be triggered in 3 different ways to sort of find different notes, and then sort of playing like the, you know, to sort of find those ways that the string sounds could work, because I don't play those instruments. I mean, I'm sure you both have this experience too. It's like, how do you get inside the sound of an instrument that you don't play, that's beyond or in addition to being able to imagine that thing? So that's kind of my own, I don't know, like sort of solution to that, is being able to play it, but in a way that feels familiar to me.
So would you say that that you have specific bands and genres and stuff that you always liked, that you think about sometimes? Is it?
So growing up, I was really into Dream Theater. I wonder if that rings a bell for you, Tom. Angus, I don't know what your takes are, but I mean, it almost feels like a little bit naff to say Dream Theater now, but absolutely, I was really into that when I was a teen and starting to play drums. And one of the first things I started to learn to play on drums was from that Scenes from a Memory album, that overture.
Overture 1928,
yeah,
or what it was called?
Yeah, that track. And I love that. And it was just such an kind of epic rock overture, but had all those hallmarks of bombastic prog rock. And I ate that kind of stuff up. So that was kind of where I got my first taste of all those changing time signatures and things like that. But I mean, sort of beyond Dream Theater, always been a massive fan of bands like Queen and The Who. So I love Keith Moon's drumming. Frank Zappa, you get Terry Bozzio, and sort of all that. I like things that are big and loud, but also like really detailed and colorful. So I guess all the groups that I've often been attracted to are rock groups that go beyond in some way. So they're not just like straight rock, but they've got some other kind of metal element or funk element or something that structurally, in my mind, makes it maybe a little more akin to what we think of as classical music.
Do you find that it's mostly the rhythmic side of these kinds of music that ends up in your own work, or is it other aspects? Is it harmony and color as well?
It is mostly rhythmic, but I think that one can't live without the other, in the way that pitch is definitely less of a focus for me in my work, even though obviously most things are assigned a pitch, but it's almost always a rhythmic hierarchy that leads me to go in some kind of direction. But I would say that secondary to that would be color or timbre, whatever we want to sort of call it here. And I'm really interested in that point where the color of an instrument is almost breaking, like almost distorted in some way. Think about, why am I attracted to those kinds of sounds? And I think maybe that comes from being sort of having some kind of envy of distorted guitars or overdriven guitars. You know, I think maybe as a composer, I'm not going to say I'm sonically frustrated. That sounds a bit weird, because I don't think I am. But, you know, it's that kind of thing where every drummer wants to be a guitarist, or every guitarist wants to be a singer, or that sort of thing. So I wonder if that's my way of kind of tapping into that and compensating in some way, or exploring it in another way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that's one of the things that it brings to your work. Do you feel that it brings other things like an increased audience, or brings you a way of explaining your work to people that they're able to latch onto more easily, or anything like that?
I do think that music that, like on a broader level, that draws from pop music does have the ability to attract a wider audience. And so I think of someone, for example, like Matthew Heinsohn, who of course we all know quite well. And I think that that's only a great thing, that if it can pull more people in. And I know that he describes his music as, what's that word that he uses? The immediacy. That's right. That's the word, isn't it? That sort of sense that someone can tune in straight away. And if there's a rhythm that people can hook onto, it immediately is less foreign. You don't get audiences saying things like, that was good, but I didn't understand it. I feel like as soon as there's a rhythm, audiences feel as though they understand it, which I don't know if that's a strange paradox or something like that. But I feel like it has some kind of effect on people as a whole, rhythm, where I feel like you can enjoy it together. And I think maybe that's what's so, in some ways, kind of like, I don't know if the right word is spiritual or something, about rock concerts and people being in a mosh pit and enjoying things together. Like, I think that physical aspect of things is really important. That kind of being in it together thing I find really appealing. And if there's one thing that I don't enjoy so much about being at classical music concerts, it's I like to look around and see if people are sort of like moving their body or their foot or their head. And I'm always really surprised by how few people do. I sort of want to shake people and be like, hey man, it's Beethoven, like, you're allowed to move. There's a groove here. So I find that just really interesting that there's this kind of perceived split between those things. And I really want to believe that there shouldn't be.
It's interesting you mentioned Beethoven and there being a groove, because like there's sort of, it could just be people actually fighting the urge because of the culture.
Yeah, I wonder about that too.
They want to, but
yeah, which I think is even more interesting if that's true, because then it's, what are we holding on to that's not letting us move like that? I mean, you're already sitting there in darkness. So
no one can see you.
like you could move, you could sort of
you could literally dance like no one's watching because no one can see you.
That's the sort of the lens that I look at creating music through, is music that makes me feel physically good. And maybe that sounds like such a base thing to say, or almost superficial, but definitely I feel like when I'm listening back to my music, I feel as though I need to be able to move around in the room to like fully understand the structure of it, and like those ratios between sections. Like, we talk about, does this bit feel longer or does this bit need to be shorter? But I feel like I can only really feel that if I can feel it through my body. I don't know if that sounds weird, but it makes sense to me because we play instruments with our body and conducting so physical. So why can't we also experience it physically as composers too?
I do something a little bit similar, actually. Do you do that as well, Tom?
Yeah, so I think I'm the current world record holder for the most bizarre dance moves because I'm very rhythmically focused, like Holly, and my rhythms are really weird and drunk sounding. So yes, I get up and I kind of move to it in a vaguely drunk way, I think, to work out whether it feels right.
Yeah. But isn't it interesting that I've actually never had that conversation with anybody? Or at least not another composer. I don't think I've ever sort of heard other composers say that. So I actually think that's fascinating.
Probably the same for lots of people. I wouldn't be surprised.
They're out there.
Out there. There's dozens of us. Dozens.
Well, stop booing. There's nothing wrong with it. There are dozens of us. Dozens!
But that's like...
So, Holly, what do you feel is your most successful synthesis of popular music into one of your compositions? Do you have a personal favorite where you feel like you just absolutely nailed it and you're really stoked with it?
Okay. No, that's really tricky question, because I also have at the back of my head, can't be something from long ago, because then what are you doing now, dude? So I think
you peaked.
I do think that my string quartet Balderdash sort of really kind of knocks that on the head, that idea of a rock string quartet battling it out against each other. But that's sort of mostly because it's set up in quite an obvious way of 4-string instruments taking on guitar techniques. So stuff like whammy bars, kind of vibrato. We're talking about things like white noise, like speaker crackling, you know, crazy dive bombs. In terms of perhaps something more recent, my trumpet concerto from last year, Hellbent. So that was written for Owen Morris and MSO, so Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. That's a lot less rocky, that one, but because it's trumpet, it definitely has much more a sense of jazz and funk imbued in that. So, I mean, that's not really something I've mentioned so far, the influence of jazz and funk, but that's absolutely in there too. And that sort of has more of a drawn out kind of metal ending, Hellbent does. The other aspect of pop music that I'm interested in that I don't think I've mentioned yet is this sort of like idea that comes from rock, or it does when I'm playing it, of that sense of being on the edge, or things being sort of could careen off in one direction at any given moment, you know. So that threshold of could things become all undone right now? Like a lot of my music sort of explores this idea of it's warping, bending, twisting, something strange, but oh no, thank goodness, like we're back on course now. I really enjoy that as a listener, and I hope that people enjoy listening to that also, even though it creates like maybe a strained sense of tension. But I think that rock music's really good at doing that. And probably, yeah, another thing that Hellbent has as well is like a breakdown section, you know, that is synonymous with sort of rock and metal or hardcore music as a whole. That moment where things really slow down and you get like a low riff, usually just on one or two notes, sometimes just a semitone apart. I love those moments, and I really try to embrace those in my music, where you get a big texture cut and then you just get like or just something like that. It's something really simple.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question that we ask everyone we interview. What's your recommendation on like a piece that you feel everyone should listen to, that's like something that you feel is really overlooked and you just want to give a shout out to?
Okay, I'm going to say there's this really great string quartet by US composer Gabriella Smith called Carrot Revolution.
Ooh, great title. That? No.
That's an incredible piece that really looks at, or you can not really looks at, but you can really hear the way that looping and the way that a lot of composers like us now work indoors, like digital audio workstations, to create little fragments and loops and how things can be put together. And I think that piece is a really great example of that.
Amazing.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I look forward to checking that out. If the
Angus.
title's anything to go by, that sounds fantastic. So we'll track down a link to that and we'll put that in the video description so people can watch it. So I'm sure that people will want to check out your music as well.
Oh,
Holly.
yeah, my music.
So where can people do that if they want to do that?
Well, people can do that in many places, but probably the easiest way to do that is to head to my website, www.hollyharrison.net, and you should be able to find anything that you'd like to listen to there of mine in my works list. Or I also have a new little tab now called Quick Listen for those that don't want to select something. They can just go in there and just sort of select something at random and go for it. Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Holly, for coming on. It's been really wonderful to get to hear all about this. It was really, really interesting. So I certainly encourage everyone to go and check out Holly's music and have a look at her website. And also everyone, please do remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you in the next video. So thanks again, Holly. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
See you, Holly.
Isn't that what you say when you've just been over at your friend's house?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Why was that always it? Thanks for having me, but like in a little voice to their parents or their mum or something.
I still do that. I still thank people for having me. I did it last night. Well, it was very nice having you.